folks. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome aboard the Max Afterburner podcast, powered, sponsored, brought to you by the No Fallen Heroes Foundation Project, the No Fallen Heroes Everything. Very special guest joining us today, a badass F-15E Strike Eagle pilot, Erin, call sign Aero Orga. How you doing, Aero?
I'm doing great, Whiz. Happy to be here.
Awesome. It is Friday. I love the paintings in the background. You are in a, we'll get into all that, but look
thanks.
at those. Are those Aero originals?
Those are not mine.
Oh, okay.
No, those are ones that I have purchased from friends. And actually the Eagle one, you can't see it, but it's got some actual Strike Eagle details, my squadron and stuff. I had it. It was a bespoke painting by an artist that I like. So.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay. All right. Well, let's get into it, man. Let's get airborne. So give us the 5-minute executive summary, how it becomes you, a badass F-15 Strike Eagle pilot, instructor pilot, and then like a nuclear engineer or something right now. And then we'll tease to the medicine, but give everybody a quick background about yourself.
Sure. Well, it all started very traumatically when I was a young kid, and I was told by an adult who asked what I wanted to be when I grew up that there was no such thing as a professional roller coaster rider. So after I got over the devastation, I decided, kind of like you and Slider, that I wanted to be an astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all the shuttle pilots and shuttle commanders were military fighter pilots, military test pilots. So I decided that was what I had to do. I went to space camp as a kid and had every intention of going to the Air Force Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the last minute, the 11th hour, I had decided to apply to Notre Dame simply because my dad went there. I'd been going to football games since I was 9 months old. Mm-hmm. And best decision I ever made in my life was to go to Notre Dame on an ROTC scholarship.
Awesome.
So
Mm-hmm.
Graduated from there and had a pilot slot, got into the Air Force. And kind of like you, I was on quote unquote casual status. That's what the Air Force called it, for a year before I went to pilot training. And the ironic thing was, I, again, still wanting to be an astronaut, wanted to go to be a test pilot. I had applied for a program to go do my master's right out mm-hmm. of college before I went to pilot training. And the Air Force turned me down. They're like, no, we need pilots. You can't take a year off.
Oh,
and then
wow.
They came back and gave me a pilot slot that was more than a year later, and I could have actually gone and done that. But
shocker.
I guess neither here nor there, although, yeah, typical military. Mm-hmm. So went in, did well enough to track select in the fighters. And then when I got to our assignment night, I'd actually been pulled in my squadron commander the day before. And hope I don't get him in trouble by saying this. He told me what our drop was going to be. So the way the Air Force does it, you've got 5 people, 10 people. They come out with 5 or 10, whatever the number of the class is, assignments, and they put it up on this big board in the officers club. And number one guy in the class stands up and says, I want the F-16. And the next guy stands up and says, I want this, and this, the next girl, etc., mm-hmm. all the way down. But you don't typically know what the assignments are until you get there.
Uh-huh.
Well, everybody knew I wanted a Strike Eagle because I'd been casual. My casual year was spent in a fighter squadron, the 336. They're a Strike Eagle squadron. Absolutely mm-hmm. loved it. Loved the airframe. Desperately wanted to fly it, and everybody knew it. So my squadron commander calls me in and he said, keep this under wraps, but here's your drop, and I want to make a proposal to you. And there was one F-16, there was one F-15C model, there were 4 A-10s, and there was a T-38 instructor pilot. And he mm-hmm. said, obviously, there's no Strike Eagle in your drop.
Yeah.
He said, you know where you are in the class? And I said, yeah, I'm third. He goes, you know what the first 2 guys are going to take, right? And I said, yeah, 16 and a C model. And he said, well, I really like you to think about taking the T-38 FAPE. They call it first assignment instructor pilot. Mm-hmm. He said, selfishly, I want you to come back because we really like you, and we think you're a good pilot. He said, but it is an opportunity for you to try again in 3 years for a Strike Eagle. He said, if you take your A-10, you're pretty much stuck there.
You're
so
in there. You're
I thought
stuck,
about it and agreed with him and decided to take the instructor pilot slot. So did that, and it all worked out because 3 years later I got a Strike Eagle. So it was all
that's
good.
Awesome. God, well, you and I both know everything works out exactly how it's supposed to.
Yep.
Now, let me foreshadow, folks. Erin was one of the first 2 female fighter pilots to do the medicine, our psychedelic assisted therapy through No Fallen Heroes. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but let's stay with the cool fighter stuff. Let's talk about the hairiest, most exciting, the holy crap Strike Eagle. Give us a good Strike Eagle there I was story.
And
I know,
so this is going to probably not be
on this podcast.
It's probably not going to be the one you think, but
okay.
So I was on the night train pretty much the entire time I was deployed, and we had been working up in Mosul, which is up in northern Iraq. And normally there was a tanker track right when you got feet dry into Iraq, and we would, hit the tanker as soon as we would get in so that we were full of gas. And then we would actually tank on the way out, just to make sure, because it was about 45-minute flight up and down the Gulf. And for whatever reason that night, since we were so far up in Mosul and we had just recently tanked because we were doing some air to ground, just reconnaissance and checking out things that the guys on the ground wanted us to look at. But we got to the end of our sortie and we were pretty heavy on gas. And so instead of tanking on the way home, we actually flew back, almost kind of skyhooked it. So we're up in the high 30s and we're in a 2-mile trail. So my flight lead's out in front of me. I'm 2 miles behind him, just with radar contact. And we'd gone feet wet over the Gulf. You could see, the lights from, Kuwait City kind of over here on the right. So we're headed south, which means over here on my left was Iran.
Bad guy.
And it's probably like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, kind of that witching hour. And all of a sudden I see this bright light flare on my left side. And my first thought was, holy shit, they're shooting at us.
Yeah.
And I look in the cockpit, I'm looking at all my raw, nothing's going off. And I'm still watching this because it's coming right at me. And I'm like, do you see that? And meanwhile, my backseater's like asleep.
Exactly.
Because we're done. We're supposed to be done for the day. And as I watched this thing, after about a second, I kind of realized what it was and, took a breath. And I literally watched this meteor shoot right over my canopy, about no more than 5,000 feet. It was huge. Whoa. Just right over me and across into, past Kuwait City. And I was like, oh my God. My flight lead didn't see it because he was 2 miles in front. It literally right over our canopy.
Whoa.
And got back, and there was all these kind of news reports for this meteor that had been sighted. It was amazing. It was beautiful, but scared the crap out of me to begin with.
Whoa. Jesus. Imagine surviving combat sorties over Iraq to get taken out by a meteor.
Yeah. And thinking about it, what would you do? You can't notch. You can't.
No, exactly.
You can't do anything.
Yeah, ain't no chaff flares for or jammers for meteors.
No, there's not.
Awesome. All right, so we got one cool Strike Eagle pilot story out of the way, and since we're time limited, if I gave her the rest of the time, she's probably got 1,000 more. But I can't stand to listen to Eagle pilots. So let's get into the heart of it. So talk us about, because you and I, you've lived it now, and I've lived it, and I can use this sentence and know it's a fact. They say that, not they, we say that the medicine calls to you. So set us up for how you ended up lying on a bed in Costa Rica. How did the medicine call you, and why?
So I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss and his podcast. I've been listening to it for years, pretty much since he started it. And at this point, he's probably had double-digit episodes on psychedelics and the whole research. Doc Martin was on one of his podcasts,
Yep.
Michael Pollan. And so, for the last probably 6-7 years, because of his podcast, listening to those and then kind of doing my own research and following along, I was aware of what was going on in this space. And you're right. I mean, it's somewhat cliche, but the medicine calls to you. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to experience this. I felt like I needed it. But at the same time, I had no clue how to do that. I had never really done any type of drugs in my life. None of my friends did. I had no idea where to even begin to look for this. And, I wasn't really qualified for any of the research studies. Most of them were already ongoing anyway. Mm-hmm. And then our mutual friend Sledge, who we were T-38 instructors together. So God moment, again, going back to how I ended up here. If I hadn't have been a T-38 instructor, I wouldn't have met Sledge. Mm-hmm. Followed along, we've been friends for 20 years and saw kind of some of the stuff that had happened to him or what he was doing, the changes, and reached out to him and said, hey, what's going on? And he told me about the No Fallen Heroes Foundation and what you guys were doing. And I went, that's my answer.
So you heard the medicine calling. Now, obviously, you're the pilot in command. You can drive where you want to go. Can you share a little bit or a lot of it, whatever you want to do? What were some of the issues that you think you needed the medicine help with?
So, unlike some of the guys that you've taken down there, I had a lot of trauma, unresolved trauma from my time in the Air Force, but it wasn't really related to combat. Some of it kind of, the Air Force is really good. The military in general is really good, right, about helping you put things in a little box and put it on the shelf and put it away and not deal with it. And 10 years ago, if you'd asked me, how was your experience being a female in the military? I would have been, oh, it was fine. I was thankfully never one of those women that suffered any sexual assaults or rapes or anything like that. But going back, there were things, right, that weren't always the best. Being a military spouse is difficult, and so I had some issues with my ex and our divorce, and just a lot of things even from childhood that I've realized have bubbled up over the years. And I think this is something that you kind of talk about, and we can kind of get into it with my journeys. I'd done a lot of work. I'd been to therapists. I had somebody after I came back from Costa Rica said, well, why can't you just talk to a therapist? Why'd you have to go do psychedelics? He said, I've been to therapists. I've done all the self-help books and things like that. And I believed I knew what the answers were, but I didn't know them. I didn't know them. And what iboga and what those journeys allow me to do was to really know those answers in a way that was not possible without that tool.
I love that. As you and I both know, radical people, Strike Eagle, Hornet, you name it, might need radical healing. So I'm glad you said that, Aero, that, hey, I went through all the, it's like when you and I have a problem in the jet and we do all the troubleshooting, we call maintenance. And of course, the maintenance guy or gal, the first thing they ask, like, sir or ma'am, did you try this? I'm like, that's why I'm talking to you right now. I did everything that in my power. Now I'm reaching out to the expert.
I turned it off and turned it back on.
I reset the generators or whatever. I pulled the circuit breakers. That's when I'm talking to you, genius. But of course, they have to ask that as their first question. Like, did you try this? But okay, so the medicine called you. You heard it. You answered. So Aero and I and Doc, Rosie and Nicole and Susie and Smurf, we gallivant our happy asses down to Costa Rica. And I want to get your take on this because obviously I debriefed it on my Costa Rica debrief, but it has to be said again, man. So we got the flight brief, from Troy. sitting there. He's briefing us about the medicine night, and here's what you do. We're going to dump it in your mouth and this and that and everything. And I swear to God, as God is my witness, I did not hear thee, but I don't chew it. So we're sitting around this fire ceremony, and to my starboard side are two badass female fighter pilots who get this iboga bark dumped in their mouthing housing group, and they just sit there and start chomping on this shit. They didn't even, so there goes Rosie, there goes Aero, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm in. So I was sitting here chewing. So again, you alluded, or you didn't allude, you actually said like, hey, I haven't never smoked weed, absolutely nothing like this in my life. So take our audience through from the moment of getting a shitload dumped in your mouth to the next day. Lay it on us.
Oh, well, yeah. So good flight brief. I think we've totally debriefed Troy on how to potentially change that for future military or fighter pilots. But one other part of that became important too is they said, stay at the fire circle until you start feeling the effects of the medicine, right? And then you can go lay down. So, Rosie was to my right. And when we sat down in the circle, honestly, I picked a seat because at the time the fire and the smoke was blowing away from me. Yeah. And I thought that was, a good one. It didn't end up helping, but we had no idea which direction who they were going to start with. And so I had already determined, I was going to chew. It didn't matter what anybody else did.
Wow.
I was going full up. And so I wasn't really paying attention to Rosie because, I was immediately next. And so by the time, they finished with her, they're walking over and I'm focused on Anthony and Troy and not really paying attention to Rosie. But so they put this in the mouth and I start chewing. I looked over and I'm like, yes, we're all on board with this. So, wow. and to kind of go along with that, again, never done any of this stuff before. And about 10 or 15 minutes later, I'm like the little kid raising my hand going, is our mouth supposed to be numb? my entire mouth was tongue, everything was tingling. And Anthony and Troy just kind of gave me this look like, that's what happens when you chew.
Yeah. When you chew root bark from Africa, that's going to happen. Oh my God. So I remember, I'm like, because my iboga gaming experience, I thought this was going to be a global thermonuclear weapon. So when Troy and Anthony kind of look across the fire to me and Smurf, because Susie bailed, Rosie bailed, and you were kind of like, I'm not feeling anything. I'm like, oh boy. And you throttled up again, didn't you?
I did. And, listening to so you pitched out, right before Smurf and I took
pitched out as soon as they stood up to come over and give you more because I knew I was next. I'm like, I'm at E-pole. I'm out.
So I sat there and again, and I can honestly look back now I was not feeling the effects at this point. There's time later where I was like, oh, I'm feeling fine, but I totally was not. But at this point in time in the fire, around the fire circle, I wasn't feeling anything. And kind of like Susie, I got up at one point to go to the bathroom and just to kind of see if I was, if I was feeling anything and just didn't realize it. And nope, I was completely fine. Mm-hmm. So Smurf pitches out too, and I'm kind of sitting there, and I was getting pretty anxious. I was starting to get really nervous.
Last man standing was a woman, the last woman standing at the fire circle.
Yeah, but I wasn't thinking about it like that. I was thinking about it like, this is not working. So Nicole came over and talked to me. Yeah. I think she knew I was getting a little anxious, and at one point she said, and this becomes important later on in my journey, this is the only reason why I mention it, is that she looked at me, she goes, just so you know, you are a badass. I was like, I don't feel like a badass right now. But okay. So again, going back to the brief, they're like, stay at the fire circle until you start feeling something. I'm not feeling anything. And so finally Nicole was like, and they kept asking me, do you feel anything? How you doing? I feel fine. Well, finally, I mean, it's getting late. It's dark. It's probably way past my normal bedtime. And I was like, well, I'm getting kind of tired. And Nicole's like, okay, well, you should go lay down. And it was like, okay, fine. That's permission
Yeah,
to leave the fire.
I'm out. Yeah.
I'm out. So I go and lay down, put the mask on, and really, I don't know how long I laid there, but nothing happened again. Nothing. And I was really getting nervous. And so then, and I think I told you guys, then my mind just started going a mile a minute, kind of like Susie said, but you know, I hadn't heard her until her debrief. I mean, my brain was flipping topics, no, like stream of, there was not really a stream of consciousness. I was jumping one thing to another, but it all kind of came in, started this really negative self-talk. You are a failure. You are a fraud. People spent money to get you here and it's not working.
Wow.
This is, you know, and it was very negative, but I felt like somebody that you give Ritalin to that's not ADHD, right? Like my brain was just super stimulated. And again, if you ask me, even when Anthony came over and gave me a third dose, he's like, are you feeling anything? I'm like, no, I'm just like, nothing is happening. And I think this is kind of a big point. And again, it's very cliche. Everyone's journey is different. And I knew that, again, believed I knew what was, or believed what was going to happen, but knowing it is completely different. And I think it's just too, because I'd never heard anybody talk about the kind of journey that I ended up having. You hear, you know, your story or Smurf's story or Rosie's story, and I don't want to take the thunder from them, you know, where you've got all these visuals and you meet God, or, you know, all this stuff happens. And for me, what mine was a very physical journey, and it was all about my ego. I was in, and I didn't realize it, I was in a high aspect BFM fight with my ego all night, and I was losing terribly. The entire time, because I kept trying to, I'm like, okay, I'm a control freak. I need to let go. And I try and let go. And, oh, I'm a failure. And then I would get into these cycles of almost like Inception where, you know, am I dreaming? Am I not dreaming? Am I tripping? Am I not tripping? I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm totally tripping. This is a test. And I try and go through my intentions and go through my trauma. And then that would just end up with me going, oh my God, I'm a failure. This is not working. I'm totally not tripping.
Wow.
And, you know, it was this constant fight. So I did do a third dose. I did not chew the third dose. I told Anthony, I'm like, yeah, I'll take a third dose, but I'm not chewing. And again, he gave me that look like, no, you don't have to. Stop. And then, I mean, probably the lowest that I got, and really, like, my ego was just about ready to gun the crap out of me. I can say, or shit out of me. And I was sitting there, and I don't know if I told you guys, I had these thoughts, and you're going to be surprised when I say what they are, but I'm like, I'm a failure. I'm a fraud. I can't go back and tell people this didn't work, that I didn't trip. I got to come up with a trip story. And so I laid there trying to think up what would be a good trip story based on, you know, my traumas and all this kind of stuff. And I couldn't come up with anything. So again, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a failure. I can't do this. And I literally, the next thought was, I'm just not going to come home from Costa Rica. I'm going to kill myself.
Oh my God.
Literally had this thought.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And you know, and then my next thought was, oh, my family will be fine. They're already used to me not being there. And then the thought after that was, holy shit, did I just seriously contemplate suicide?
Wow.
While I'm on iboga? It's like, I need help. And at that point, I sat up and was looking around for help, because again, so important. And this is why it's important to go to a place that has experienced facilitators. Because if that would have happened on my own,
by
who knows
yourself,
where I would have
oh
gone.
My God. Yeah, exactly.
But you know, we had a good, in addition to our core brief on what the ceremony was going to be like, you know, we had met with Anthony and Troy on an individual basis to kind of go through you know, what we were trying to get out of that journey. And Troy had made a point of saying, you know, if you need it, ask for help. You know, and he said, if I come over and you don't want to talk to me, you know, ask for Maya, ask for Kasha, ask for Anthony. Don't be afraid to advocate for whoever you want to talk to, we're not going to take it personally. We're going to be really happy that
Exactly.
you know exactly what you want, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of took that to heart, and I didn't realize the significance. This is one of the things that kind of came out of my post journey integration, was the significance of the fact that I asked for help that night.
Yeah.
Because I don't ask for help ever. Part of the trauma that I was trying to get through, and there's a lot of reasons for it. But because in the past, when I have occasionally asked for help, I didn't get help, right? Okay. But I got help this night, and I
wow,
pushed my eye shades up, and Brian was there, and I feel bad for Brian because I was like, no, I don't want to talk to you. And it wasn't because of him, it was just, he was a very quiet, he was kind of an unknown. He hadn't really been in a lot of stuff. We'd only been there for like 24 hours. My pre-integration work had been with Maya. Troy had been very involved. And so I said, can I talk to Troy? And he said, well, Troy's busy with somebody else right now. Can I help you? I'm like, no, I'm good. Just tell him to come by when he gets done. Meanwhile, he was going to be busy the entire night, and that's another podcast for you to go through with Smurf. But I think he did go and find Anthony, because Anthony came over and we had a discussion. So again, I would have told you that I wasn't really tripping at this point, or I kind of was. I was getting a little bit of visuals, but I kind of had to really focus on something in my dark space, my field of vision, to bring them up. And they didn't mean anything. I still don't, I'm still trying to figure out what they were for, or what what they meant. But so Anthony offered me a 4th dose. I said yes, even though at the time my stomach was really kind of hurting, but not enough to really feel like I needed to do anything about it. So I did a 4th dose, and he said, would you like me to journey with you? And I said, sure, that would be great. And so laid there, and now the visuals were there constantly. I didn't have to focus to kind of bring them up. And so went on this journey with Anthony through my childhood, through, a lot of the stuff, because they ask you to put down your significant, events in your journal so that they can help you. So we walked through all that. And again, if you'd asked me then, or even the next day, I would have told you that it was no help. And post integration, I realized it was everything. It was important to go through all of that stuff, just like I had with therapists. But again, believing the answer and actually knowing the answer are completely different things. Absolutely. And so that journey and that time with Anthony going through all that really helped me know in a way I hadn't been able to without the iboga.
Wow.
But we get to the end of that, and he kind of said, so how are you feeling? And I said, I got to be honest, I still feel like a fraud. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm wasting your time. He said, well, glad you're honest. What else would you like to do? And I said, well, I think I want to lay here for a little while by myself. And he said, okay, I'm here if you need me. And so laid, put the eye shades back on, laid back down, and just kind of started going through all of that again. And it wasn't probably too long after he left that, again, had the continual thoughts of, and this has been my, one of my big issues with all of my traumas. Why does one person, able to get over something and another person can't? And all of my stuff is because of my ego. And like I said, I was in this high aspect BFM fight the entire night where my ego was just beating the crap out of me. And didn't, because it didn't want to let go. It didn't want to let go of the control. And, I had this thought of, again, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud. And then out of nowhere, this goes back to, Nicole, I said, no, I am a badass. And I believed it. And probably since then, I have not had those thoughts.
Wow.
And that was the reversal, man. I went offensive, and I just spent the rest of the night
Defensive to neutral to offensive, man. I love it.
Yeah, split second. And I spent the rest of the night kind of thinking about my son, thinking about different things. My stomach was really hurting. I didn't purge vomit wise, but I did have to get up and go to the bathroom, and that was big. But that was another purging of my ego.
Energy. Ego.
Exactly. So that was kind of the main thing for that night.
I love and Erin obviously now can speak to this. The medicine gives you what you need, not what you want. And also, you hit on a lot of the expectation thing, right? That's why I don't know if it was Michael Pollan or somebody in all my reading. The guy's like, I hesitate to even tell you about my journey because there's no way on God's green earth yours is going to be anything even close to this, right? So if you're listening to Aero's story right now, you ain't going to get hers either because that was hers.
No, but recognize that whatever happens, it is the medicine working. You may not go on this mind-blowing trip that's very existential. Yep. It may be, like me, where you think nothing's happening, and it really is. You're going through your stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's gonna hit you a day later, 2 days later, a week later, as you do that integration. And that's why that integration work again is so important. So I guess for everyone, realize that and again, you can hear it so many times. You can hear people say your journey is going to be different, but sometimes too, not knowing even what the other possibilities are, you may not recognize what's going on. So you can have a very physical journey.
Yeah.
And it's important to do it in the right set and setting with the right people, because you can get yourself potentially into trouble.
Exactly. I love the fact that you asked for help. I mean, I think the medicine pushed you to the point where you're like, I got to raise my hand. And there's a good lesson learned in that. All right. So
it was, and I finally got helpful help when I asked.
There you go.
So that was
exactly
huge.
Right. For the first time in your life, when you put up the bat signal, the help came that you needed. I think that's what an incredible lesson learned. So we'll get to the integration here in a little bit, but so we have a discovery day. You kind of get your mind right. You spend some time alone. Take us through the second time. So at Awaken Your Soul, folks, you sit with the medicine twice, and you get like a day and a half-ish in between. So talk us through your second medicine experience with iboga.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add, one of the other kind of key things that came up during my first integration day, gray day, that I think is important, because again, when you hear about my second journey, it kind of all rolls together, was, again, talking to Nicole. She's wisdom herself. We were sitting there talking about it, and I don't know whether she said it or it was just a connection I made. But, again, you hear the phrase, you can't take it with you. And I'd always thought about that when it comes to material wealth, material things. And she may have said it, but it was, there are no trophies in heaven. Like, you can't take your trophies to heaven. And I'm very much a gold star person. My love language is that gold star. And I was like, oh, because again, it's my ego telling, my ego giving me props and things like that. But it doesn't matter in the whole grand scheme of things. And it doesn't matter when you move on. And so that was another big lesson. And so my second journey, I'll tie it back into flight instructing, right? This was my check ride. This was, did you really beat your ego? So, cause I did 3 doses on the second journey, and I didn't get any visuals, but everything was spinning. And I could tell pretty much right after the second dose that, now having gone through it once, I kind of recognized the signs that I was feeling it. But again, there was no mystical meeting of God. There was no reliving of all my traumas. I just laid there and I let go of control. There was no negative self-talk like on the first one. My ego was completely quiet.
Wow.
And I got to the point, everything was spinning almost, like sometimes when you get really, really drunk, everything will spin. But it was pretty quiet. But I did have to go use the bathroom quite a bit, more so than the water I drank. But the first time I got up to go to the bathroom, people get sick in the jet because of this disconnect, right, between what their inner ear is telling them and what their eyes are telling them. We would have backseaters who would get sick all the time because they're focused on the targeting pod and not paying attention to all the G's that we're doing for pops and things like that. And so, your inner ear is telling you one thing. It's like, holy shit, we're doing all this funky stuff. And your eyes are going, nope, we're good. No, and your stomach's like, what? Well, it's kind of the opposite for me. When I got up to go use the bathroom, like there was all these, the lights were all really bright and I was getting all these tracers and everything was spinning. And so my eyes were going, whoa, what the hell is going on? And my inner ear's like, what are you talking about? We're fine.
We're straight and level.
We're good. And so I got back to my bed after the first one and immediately felt like I needed to throw up. And I did a little bit, but not a lot. And, kind of everybody asked, well, how did you feel when you were, purging? Because typically it's an energy release. And I still felt awful. Like it was one of those, well, that didn't help at all.
Yeah.
So laid there again. And I didn't have a problem with the music, but it's very repetitive.
Yes.
And so I got to the point where my stomach was really bothering me and I was bored. If you can believe that, I was bored. It was one of those like, okay, well, nothing's going to happen. Meanwhile, lots of things were happening. I just didn't realize it until the integration, right? And so again, I sat up, Troy came over and I felt really bad. And I apologized to him the next day because he's like, how are you doing? I'm like, and I said, I sounded like a very petulant child. I'm like, I'm bored. He just kind of looked at me again. Bored.
Yeah.
He's like, well, there's a lot of the night left. So he started talking to me and he had asked if I had thrown up and I was like, no, I don't even feel like I need to. And I literally, the word had not even gotten out of my mouth and I was like, oh my God. And I'm reaching for my bucket. and he's like, man. I have that effect on people.
Yeah.
So this one though was the huge, and I don't know that I really felt anything while I was purging, but afterwards I was like, oh, that was what I needed. I felt lighter. I felt like I'd gotten everything out. And I think that was, kind of, the ultimate of the, okay, you passed the test. Here goes your ego. Goodbye.
Wow. The ultimate flush.
So I laid back. Yeah. So I laid back down and immediately I was like, oh my God, I feel so bad. I can't believe I said that to Troy. I sounded awful. And then he came back over and said, hey, since, you're kind of with it. And that was the thing on all my journeys too. I know you get people talk about like hearing conversations and realizing that nobody's there. I was awake and I'll say awake and aware of everything that was going on. And that was actually why I switched beds, because the first journey I was right by the stairs. And people were going up and down and past me, and it was one of those like, was that really somebody? And I would check and be like, oh yeah, that was somebody. So it wasn't like I was hearing or seeing things. I was actually hearing and seeing things that were really going on. So anyway, so Troy was like, well, you seem like you're kind of with it. Why don't you? And we had a discussion about the 4 Agreements book. The author's name is escaping me. It's a great book, but he said, why don't you lay here? He's like, we make all these agreements with ourselves. And because I think he knew what kind of journey I was on. It all had to do with my ego. And he said, we make all these agreements with ourselves that either are flat out lies or they don't serve us. And he gave me this beautiful, very, he was very open, trusting, beautiful example of one of his that he had come to realize. It was very personal, and I appreciated that. And he said, why don't you just lay here the rest of the night and think about, what agreements you've made with yourself that don't serve you and that you need to get rid of. And so that's kind of what I did the rest of the night. So went from being bored to having a mission.
Homework.
So whether he knew or I had an assignment, whether he did it on purpose or whether it was just, intuitive because he's that kind of guy. He gave me a mission for the rest of the day.
That's awesome. Like you alluded to, the staff down there is pretty awesome, and you can tell that the medicine works through them, and they can tell kind of what you need or kind of what to say. So they really are gifts from God. Talk to us about the integration, because like you've heard me say, I believe 5% the medicine, 95% the integration. How is the what are we're close to 3 months? How's your integration been?
It has been good. Again, so if you'd asked me right at the end of the retreat, kind of probably like Bart, I would have said like, I got a couple things, but we'll see. But coming back, kind of hitting on those topics again, the asking for help, both of the journeys, and actually getting helpful help was huge. Coming back and realizing that, that iboga had allowed me to really know, feel, understand the answers that I needed to. I've been very conscious of my ego, and really when I said, I hadn't really had those thoughts of I'm a failure, I'm a fraud since I, reversed. I truly haven't. It's not to say that I haven't had issues, but I haven't had that particular one.
Perfect.
So, but I am still working on my ego because it's not completely gone. But there are a lot of different areas. And so what I've been working with Troy for my post integration, and he had me read this book called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, and it talks about. Have you read it?
I've read it.
Oh my gosh,
absolutely
fabulous book. It has been huge. I got done maybe 2 weeks ago, and have been really trying to use it with some of the other things, and it's been amazing. So just the doors that open up, even not going back to resolving your traumas and going through everything that it showed you, but there's just so many other doors that seem to open up because you're looking. So
your field of view is a little cleaner and a lot more to use your radar scan is opened up a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. Again, good analogy, and I sometimes use this at work, but both of my journeys, I'm wanting to get out on an 80-mile scope. I'm wanting to get out and see the world, right? And iboga's like, no, we're in guns, man. You got something within 2 miles that you got to deal with, right? You better.
Oh man,
get on it.
That's incredible. What advice would you give to a female or a veteran or anybody coming behind you who's thinking about this, listening to this podcast, like, well, if she can do it, what's some of your pre-flight checklist, your lessons learned to put the ladder down?
Again, the medicine calls to you. You'll know if this is the right thing, but some people, if you're not sure, there are so many other modalities. We learned breath work with Joe when we were down there.
Wow, that was
just absolutely cool. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I did one of the sound journeys with Troy. That was amazing as well. And had its own kind of things that probably don't have time to talk about, but there are so many other modalities that if you're not completely sure that this is right for you yet, try some of those others. I have a friend that does equine facilitated learning. There's guided meditations, the breath work, the sound, all of that. Because if you go through some of those and they don't help, then it may help push you, show you that
Exactly.
this is the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It really sounds, it is a journey, right? My journey, it was hot yoga, led to mindfulness, led to medicine. So you're exactly right. You can, as you've heard me say before, you can walk on the beach. There are so many different ways, and kind of cross them off your list. Well, hey, I tried that and it didn't work. I tried that, didn't work. You don't have to run right here. Like she and I have both been saying, the medicine is going to call to you. So sometimes radical trauma might need radical healing as opposed to some of the other modalities, but there are a ton of modalities out there.
Yeah, and it's radical, but at the same time, I would tell people don't judge your traumas, right? I kind of alluded to it, and because my ego, you may think that yours isn't important, or it's just something with you. Other people have gotten divorced. Why can't I get over mine?
Exactly.
Or mine's just not as, when you hear some of these other people again that are speaking out, that have amazing stories and they're inspirational, but at the same time, like there's no good or bad, there's no level.
Trauma is trauma.
And so trauma is trauma. And so just because this is somewhat radical healing doesn't mean that you have to have radical trauma. If it's bothering you, if it's upsetting you, if it's impacting your family relationships, your relationships at work,
correct,
then it's worth looking into. And it's radical, but it doesn't have to be radical, right?
Correct.
And you don't have to have radical trauma to do this.
That's a great way to put it. Plus, the iboga that you and I sat with has been used for thousands and thousands of years in Gabon, in Western Africa and Central Africa, as a rite of passage, or for after childbirth. They use it for all sorts of things. So you're right. This ain't for, I'm not a veteran. You don't have to be a veteran. We're trying to heal everybody. Our mission objective is to heal everybody, not just veterans, right?
Yeah, I suffered from postpartum depression after I had my son Josh, and I wish I knew about it then. It was probably another 5 or 6 years before I found Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I think they're finally starting to look at how they've looked at how psychedelics can help the veteran community, specifically with things like PTSD and combat trauma. And they've looked at MDMA and couples therapy, but I think people are finally starting to think of what specific things related to being a woman. And I can define being a woman, but we won't go there.
Exactly.
But there are some significant things that they are now finally looking at, like postpartum depression. Melissa, for the vets coalition and things like that, she had a lot of issues like that. Correct. So for women, don't be afraid to look at this for some of those types of issues as well.
Correct. Yeah. Melissa at the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, just good stuff. I saw a story yesterday or earlier in the week that MDMA might be FDA approved by October-ish, which means by next year-ish, we could be seeing this rolled out. So this is coming.
Be awesome.
I was sitting, we had Wayne Gretzky stopped by to see Bobby Orr in the Thompson Option Suite. That was awesome. But I gave Bobby
Mario Lemieux is the better.
Exactly. But I briefed Bobby Orr on all this stuff, and he was just blown away. He's like, why aren't we doing this? The NHL Players Association should be doing this for the guys. I'm like, well, let me introduce you. You know Daniel Carcillo? So I told him about Car Bomb. And so this podcast, we're putting the ladder down. Just one person, if this hits one person and we can help heal one person. I know we're helping hundreds and maybe even thousands of people heal. But if this speaks to you, reach out to Erin directly, reach out to me, reach out to anybody. Our beautiful soul, our director of medicine operations, Nicole Fox, is just an incredible medicine woman on earth. And maybe Erin, you can join her when she goes to Gabon next time to get initiated into a tribe.
I might be good with the boga.
Yeah, you and me both, man. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good for now.
And let me just say that it's not, I don't want to scare people from that. It's just, I'm good.
Exactly.
It was not, I think we've talked about this before, it was not as, I think, harsh as your ibogaine journeys, right?
No.
God is a perfect chemist, right? There's a reason why there's all these other alkaloids in iboga, not
Correct.
just ibogaine.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't want to scare people, but at the same time, I don't want to not be truthful. It's a journey, right? It's an effort. It is not, fun and games and let's go to Costa Rica and do drugs, and that the purpose is to heal, and it will allow you to heal if you give it the space to do it, honor it, and do the work that's required pre and post journey to set yourself up for success.
I love it. Aero, as usual, put the bow on top. You got to put the work in, folks. This ain't iboga, any of these medicines, psilocybin, MDMA. They aren't magic pills.
Yeah.
They're a reset button. What you do after the system reset is up to you. You cycle the generators, put it back on. What you do after that is on you. If you go back to your old habits and patterns, it might be challenging. And it might even be more challenging than before, because the medicine kind of shows you, hey, man, I gave you a chance, and here you are back here. So you could even spiral down lower. So like you alluded to, this is not a free lunch, and this ain't free healing. You got to put in a little bit of effort and want it, Yeah.
But it does let you make those new connections. And, I've been meditating every day since I got back.
Yeah.
I've been doing better as far as
your pre and post picture. Your eyes got clearer. You
no,
look
I didn't.
like younger. Yeah, I saw. It showed me Nicole or something. Remember, they took like before and after pictures. You can see that. I mean, even now you look brighter. So it does change you physically and physiologically. So at least I see it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Exactly.
I feel better. I felt later since I came back, and
awesome.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, we're gonna put Aero on the road here. I'm gonna get her and Rosie on the road. I think you're gonna go to New York for the big Concordia thing. I got to get you and Rosie out there too, because obviously the Navy Special Warfare guys, the Rangers, this was all kind of special forces stuff, and you and Rosie are blazing a trail, putting down the ladder for the female side of the house, and you're incredibly brave. This took courage, Erin. Absolute incredible courage. You're one of the bravest women I know. And keep up the good work. We appreciate it. And you're a great mom and human being.
Thanks.
So, all right, guys, I'm going to get going. Erin, thanks for joining us. We'll have Erin back. This ain't the last you see her. She's going to be stepping up and taking a leadership. Already has leading the way for folks. So thanks for coming, Erin. Everybody else and you, of course, everybody else have a great rest of your day. Happy hunting. Make sure you hedge. Fights on. Namaste and basi basi.